Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We have a special guest with us here today. This is little Rosalia DeJoseph. Rosalia, you want to say hello? Say hi. Can you blow a kiss? No, you just want to eat that Sharpie? Okay. In any case, guys, she's going to be with us here today. Okay. Hopefully she's not too much of a distraction, but we'll plug we'll plug along. Before we get started today, we can't go on without acknowledging something very sad and unfortunate that happened over the weekend. I'm talking, of course, about the death of the GOAT, the greatest of all time, someone who we learned about in this class, rock and roll legend. Little Richard died over the weekend. I believe he was 86 years old. So, yeah, we want to, I think we should maybe pay tribute to him in some special way. I need to think about what exactly that's going to be, but maybe you have some ideas of how we could pay tribute to one of the legends of rock and roll, um, one of the originators, one of the first big rock stars, Little Richard. Okay, so, uh, a wop bambaloo bop a lop bamboo to you. Um, Maybe we could get like a Tutti Frutti TikTok challenge. Okay, maybe a Long Tail Sally TikTok challenge or something. I don't know. It should be appropriate. We want to honor him, not we don't want to make light of it. But yeah, that's something that happened over the weekend. I was sad to hear. Just without Little Richard, you might not have, you probably wouldn't have had the Beatles. Not only was he a major influence on the Beatles, but um, he was one of the first tours the Beatles did was as an opening act for Little Richard in his 1962 tour of the United Kingdom. The Beatles were his opening act, and at that point, no one had really heard of the Beatles. So, he kind of gave them their big break, and of course, the Beatles would go on to be the influence for many different rock bands over the decades. So, Little Richard, we love you, man. We stand Little Richard, and we'll never forget him, right? Okay. But let's move on though into the 1970s because we have to go forward. That's the only way to go. Let's bring on the noise. Okay, so in the 1970s here, we start to really diverge as far as genres of rock and roll. Rock and roll had kind of been this, monolithic thing that kind of moved all together with, some, differentiation. But now in the 70s, things really start to break up. You start to get many, many different unique and long-lasting genres of rock and roll. Okay, so in the early 1970s, what starts to get really, really popular is, this kind of continuation of the folk rock revival of the 60s, but also what we may call the natural evolution of that, which are these soft rock artists like James Taylor, okay, Carole King. You may be familiar with if you've ever seen the Broadway musical. I think it was called Beautiful, which is a Broadway musical about the life of Carole King, and all of the songs in the musical are Carole King songs. And she, had a successful career as a singer-songwriter, but she also wrote songs for other artists to perform. And she's one of those artists too. When you see all the songs she has written, you might not be aware of just how many hit songs that she had because they were spread over many different artists. She wrote songs for different artists to perform. So she has tons and tons of #1 hits. Sorry guys, if you can hear this stuff. My daughter is kind of wrecking the joint here, but that's okay. We're going to move on. So anyway, that starts to become very, very popular. And uh, what we should know about, like this, we've talked about this several times, is that when something starts to become really popular, there oftentimes is a reaction against it. Okay, so with soft rock being as popular as it was, um, the reaction against that is going to be things like hard rock and heavy metal. And then you get the experimental stuff too, right? So we're going to talk about art rock and glam, and then eventually we're going to talk about punk, okay? All right, so let's first talk about Led Zeppelin. Led Zeppelin. Such a important band. Um, we've mentioned the term supergroup before, a group where each member of the band is considered to be one of the best at their particular instrument, or maybe the best. And I would consider Led Zeppelin to be in that group, okay? So in this picture here, clockwise from the left, we have the great Robert Plant, vocalist. Okay, we have Jimmy Page. Now, I'm in the middle of grading your history of the British invasion projects, and some of you chose the Yardbirds, which is awesome because Jimmy Page got his start as as a member of the Yardbirds. So Jimmy Page is someone who came from, he has those British invasion ties. He was in a British invasion band, and he would go on to be the guitarist of Led Zeppelin, and who many consider to be the best guitarist in rock and roll history. Going clockwise still, we have next John Bonham, the drummer, and then John Paul Jones, who played bass and keyboards for Led Zeppelin. Let's talk about it. So, fronted by squealing tenor Robert Plant. I think squealing, you might not get the squealing, almost sounds like a pig, but Robert Plant is considered to be one of the greatest rock and roll vocalists of all time. And really what we mean by squealing is he has this really transcendent high register in his voice. I'll post some Led Zeppelin below here, and you'll see just how awesome sounding. And I use the term like literally there, like awe-inspiring. Robert Plant's high vocal range can be. And Jimmy Page was also a leader in the band. So Led Zeppelin would get kind of criticized in some ways because they would say, "Oh, you're just like a rip-off blues band, but you put on distorted guitars, and you just play blues songs like in a heavy metal style." But I don't really like that criticism of them because so what if that's what they did? That's something unique. They did some blues covers, like lots of rock and roll bands did. But they also have, really unique original songs, and the majority of their songs, almost all of them, are original songs. And it's not really fair, I don't think, to criticize them for that because, like I said, all bands, rock and roll bands, are inspired by the blues, and they maybe just paid more tribute to the blues roots of rock and roll than other bands. Is that unoriginal somehow? I don't think so. By 1970, they had released 3 very successful albums. Okay. Led Zeppelin 4 came out in 1971. So in 1970, they came out with Led Zeppelin 1, Led Zeppelin 2, and Led Zeppelin 3. 1971, Led Zeppelin 4 came out. Um, this is where Led Zeppelin 4 is where you get a lot of what you may consider to be their big hits. Stairway to Heaven, for example, Black Dog, Rock and Roll. These are all songs off of Led Zeppelin 4. And then in 1973, they came out with Houses of the Holy, which, House of the Holy, which is just a really awesome album. I'll post some songs from that album down below too. Maybe you may notice I'm wearing a t-shirt today, even though it's not Friday. And the t-shirt I'm wearing, I don't know if you can see this, or if it's going to be backwards. It says the Fillmore East. Okay, Fillmore East is a venue in New York City, or was. It's called something else now. It's like Pier something or other. But for a while, this was the East Coast version of the Fillmore, which is a very famous music venue in Los Angeles. And the Fillmore East became so popular that they decided to open one up on the East Coast. And this is where Led Zeppelin played their first performance in America. My dad likes to tell this story because my dad was actually there, which is pretty cool. I like to talk to him about that. He was there to see Led Zeppelin's first performance in America at the Fillmore East, and they were not the headliner. The headliner was a band which had a big hit song at the time, and Led Zeppelin was pretty unknown. The headliner for that show was called Iron Butterfly, and they had a song called In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida. Okay, In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida. I'm going to post that below so you can hear it. This is another song that's like 10 or 15 minutes long because of like this tremendous organ solo that they have. But for the radio, they would kind of cut that part out. But this is known to be like one of the, as a prime example of these big, long anthems that came out in the late 60s and early 70s. So you'll check that out. Really? In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida by Iron Butterfly. Now, it's almost funny when you think of, like, I would say probably very few of you have heard of Iron Butterfly, but I would suspect that most of you have at least heard of Led Zeppelin, even if you don't know any songs by them. And I'm sure there's quite a few of you who do know a lot of songs by Led Zeppelin. When I'm asked who my favorite band is, that's always a hard question for me to answer, but most of the time the answer that I give is Led Zeppelin, just because they were very influential and kind of sparked this hard rock style in the 1970s. Lots of bands would go on to emulate, and some people say that Led Zeppelin really started heavy metal music. Okay. And to that end, bands that list Led Zeppelin as one of their influences include bands like Black Sabbath, Blue Oyster Cult, Aerosmith, AC/DC, Guns N' Roses, Metallica, U2, Jack White. Now, a lot of those bands, not all of them, but a lot of those bands are heavy metal bands. Okay. All right, let's talk about prog rock. So prog rock, it's one of those things you kind of either love it or hate it. It's considered to be a more cerebral, maybe a more intellectual style of rock and roll. This is people who became interested in rock and roll who were had backgrounds in classical and jazz music, maybe were, maybe knew a little bit more about music theory and form than someone who just like, picked up a guitar and, listened to some blues records in their garage and tried to emulate that style. These were people who maybe knew a little bit more about how to compose music, and were more interested in the classical and jazz styles. Okay, and this really got started in the late 60s, but really came like the golden age of prog rock is the 1970s. These are bands like Yes, King Crimson, Genesis, Jethro Tull, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and not listed here. I'm not sure why I didn't put this down, but probably the most well-known, the best example of prog rock that I can give you is the band Rush. Okay, and we started talking this with the death of Little Richard. This year started off with the unfortunate passing of Neil Peart, the drummer from Rush. Some people say that's how they knew 2020 was going to go on to be kind of a messed up year, because it started off with this tragic passing here of the drummer of such a great band. But a band that also can be classified as prog rock is the band Pink Floyd. Now, I guess we can call them a prog rock band, but I think they tend to transcend that label. There are certain bands like that where they may be a great example of a particular genre, but they are so up and kind of high above that particular genre that they transcend it. I'm sorry if that did not make any sense. I have children who are upstairs and yelling at me that they made lunch or something, so I apologize. See, folks, I know some of you guys have siblings and you have to share technology and stuff. I try to get a way to make some of these video lessons, but when you have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old in the house, it's hard to get away sometimes. So let's talk about Pink Floyd here. There they are in the early 70s. They were actually originally a cover band, and they would play just really unique and offbeat versions of blues songs. Notice how Pink Floyd doesn't get this criticism for quote-unquote ripping off blues songs, but Led Zeppelin does. I don't think either rip them off. I think that's the wrong terminology to use. But their name comes from 2 different Georgia blues artists, Pink Anderson and Floyd Cancel. They combined those 2 names to get the band Pink Floyd. And they were led by the, we'll say, unpredictable Syd Barrett from 1965 to 1968, after which Roger Waters would take over the lead. In 1967, they released the album Piper at the Gates of Dawn, which a notable track from this album is called Interstellar Overdrive. It's an instrumental track, meaning there are no vocals. It's just instrumental. It's a pretty long song, and this is part of the psychedelic rock that was going on in the late 60s that we mentioned last time. Okay, but in my opinion, their magnum opus, their great work, is 1973's Dark Side of the Moon, the first album to introduce electronic experimental music to a mass audience. Of course, there had been electronic and experimental music before this, particularly in the world of classical music, but this brings it to a mass audience because it's through rock and roll now, and rock and roll is kind of the predominant form of pop music through the 60s and into the 70s. It featured the top 20 single Money, and the album hit #1 in the US, so that makes it very, very big. There are plenty of other great songs here, and I'll put some below, some of my favorite songs off of Dark Side of the Moon. If you notice, there's 3 different pictures here. The one that is the prism with the triangle with the white light hitting the prism and then coming out, refracted as the rainbow color. That's the album cover of Dark Side of the Moon. Just a classic album cover, can't be mistaken. This has some great tracks on it, so besides Money. I'll post some of those below. I also recommend, I remember I did this with my friends in high school. There's this urban legend that if you start the Dark Side of the Moon album at the very beginning of the movie Wizard of Oz, it like weirdly matches up, where like some of the lyrics seem to be describing things that happen on screen, and certain beats line up with beats in the movie, and it's pretty freaky. I'm not sure if it's just like a crazy coincidence or if this was done on purpose. I don't know. It seems too crazy to be a coincidence, but it also seems too crazy to been done on purpose too. So I don't know. I really don't know. But see, back in my day, you would have to get the CD, and then there was a whole thing. I think this is like back in the earlier days of the internet, where you could stumble on a message board that would have the instructions, and it was like, when the lion roars on the 3rd time at the beginning of the movie, that's when you press play, and then everything lines up. But now we live in the days of YouTube, and someone has done that part for you already on YouTube. So maybe I'll post the YouTube video of Dark Side of the Moon lined up exactly with the Wizard of Oz. Pretty creepy stuff. Pretty creepy, but interesting, fun. In 1979, they released The Wall, with the song everyone knows from this album is Another Brick in the Wall, right? We don't need no education. Actually, by your grammar in that sentence, it would appear that you too need an education. All right. Anyway, it became the 3rd best-selling album of all time worldwide. I think that's still the case, actually. I made this slideshow a few years ago, but I believe that's still the case. For a long time, Michael Jackson's Thriller was the #1 best-selling album of all time. And the #2, weirdly enough, I always found this so interesting, was the Eagles' Greatest Hits album. Very interesting. But actually, in the past 2 years, I want to say, the Eagles' Greatest Hits album has actually surpassed Michael Jackson's Thriller. So the order goes Eagles' Greatest Hits, Thriller by Michael Jackson, and then I still think it's The Wall by Pink Floyd. And then I think #4 is like Billy Joel's Greatest Hits or something like that. Now, I'm a Long Island boy. We were issued copies of Billy Joel, when we were first born in the hospital. They would give us an album, right? So, I mean, I love me some Billy Joel. I just listened to Downeaster Alexa earlier today. So, did you hear that? That was creepy. But so I love me some Billy Joel, but the #4 best-selling album of all time is his Greatest Hits album. I mean, he does have great. Anyway, this is all besides the point. Go listen to all 4 of those albums. They're all great ones. Okay. I think that's going to be it for today. Is it? Yeah. So next time we'll talk about glam rock and how glam leads us into punk rock. Okay, the 2 genres are actually very, very closely related. Some might even call glam a subgenre of punk, but it has roots that predate punk, if that makes sense. So far so good, everybody. Hope you're doing well. Go make sure you listen to all these examples because they're all really, it's all great music. You might find something that you have never heard before that you really like, but it's important to listen to this so that we understand where all this music is coming from and how it's evolving over the decades. Um, yeah, make sure you maybe I'll post some Little Richard too, even though he's from 20 years prior to this, because man, it's sad that he's gone. He was 86 years old. I'm not sure if it was COVID. They didn't say, at least in the articles that I read, they didn't list the cause of death, but he's 86. Um, Still very sad, and just a pioneer of this genre. We wouldn't have so many of the bands that we have today if it wasn't for Little Richard and people like him, like Chuck Berry and Jerry Lee Lewis and many of the others who we talked about. The other thing I want to just mention quickly here is I have a special treat for you guys, and I want you to start thinking about this now. I don't have a date set yet, but I have approval from administration, and I have also an agreement from the artist himself. But sometime in June, and I'll get you the exact date at some point in the near future. But at some point in June, we are going to have a live Q&A on like a Zoom call or something like that. I'll get you all that information with a man named Mike Miley, who is the drummer for a very well-known modern rock band called Rival Sons, Grammy nominated. They're really an awesome band. They're one of my favorite bands, and I was DMing him through Instagram, and this just came up, and he agreed to answer some questions for you guys. So I really want you to think about what questions you would want to ask him. I would actually like everyone. I'm not assigning this right now, but I would like everyone eventually. And I'll give a due date for this, but I would like everyone to think of like 5 to 10 questions that you would want to ask the drummer of a Grammy-nominated rock band. And think about what that would be. I mean, you're not going to all get to. Everyone is not going to get to ask 10 questions to this guy, but I would love for there to to not be that kind of awkward silence, for everyone to have something to say. And if you maybe it turns out to be like a conversation, maybe it's more Q&A, but it's a great thing to meet Mike and to see that this is not a dead genre. From the 50s all the way through the 90s, rock and roll was, one of, if not the prominent form of pop music in our country. For the past 20 years or so, that has not been the case. And, we don't have a rock radio station anymore. Actually, we kind of do. Like they kind of come in and out, though, When I was growing up in the 90s, we had 92.3, which is called K-Rock, and that was the modern rock station. We had plenty of bands that came out, and you would listen to them on the radio, just like, you find out your pop music from like Z100. You went to K-Rock to get your rock music, the modern rock music that was coming out, like, every month, like a new band would have a new album, right? So, and that is still the case, but we just don't hear about it so much anymore because these rock radio stations are pretty, a lot of them are not there, or they're very, very small. So, but the music is not dead. It's still being created. It's and people are still making successful livings for themselves, going on tour and selling their albums and things like that. So, we don't want this type of music to go away. Um, so, guys like Mike are really carrying the torch, and they're starting to, things are starting to come around with rock and roll, I think. Um, and the bands like Rival Sons that are, some of the more popular bands nowadays, they are throwbacks. So if you listen to, and I encourage you to listen to some Rival Sons, if you listen to them, they are a throwback. They have a sound that is very much like some of these bands in the 1970s. Um, so anyway, check them out, Rival Sons, and think about what questions you would want to ask Mike Miley, the drummer from Rival Sons. Okay. Now, until next time, I will see you, ladies and gentlemen. Have a great day. R.I.P. Little Richard, right? Requiescat in pace, rest in power, and go listen to some rock music. All right. Goodbye. Say bye, Rosalia. Say bye-bye. 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 It's almost her nap time. That's why she's okay. Goodbye. Goodbye.